And looking forward to your talk.
Thank you for having me here, and apologize for the delay. The roads are not very friendly out there. So what normally takes me 45 minutes took me over an hour. In any case, I'm here, and hopefully you got a chance to get some food, and I have a happier audience as a result of that. And I will be talking about food production and other things along the way. So just to acknowledge some of the other people that were involved in this research that I'll be presenting. Ted Ock was a postdoc for the project with the Cleveland Botanical Garden. Laura Rose was one of my students. Oberlin seniors often get very involved in research with faculty. So she was involved in this project throughout the process. And then there were several student assistants at Oberlin College who participated in this research along the way. It was about a 2-year research project funded by the Great Lakes Protection Fund through the Cleveland Botanical Garden. So the context all of you are familiar with is that the Rust Belt cities are faced with numerous challenges at the time. Economic challenges, questions about how do you deal with post-industrial cities? How do you think about growth and development and progress for Rust Belt cities that have lost population? The demographics in these cities have changed. The industrial infrastructure and the commercial nature of these cities are evolving and changing. So part of the challenge of thinking about sustainable development in post-industrial cities is really thinking outside of the box of traditional models of development. And that is where sort of my work and my research is situated. And this is one of those research projects. So I call it one of many sustainable solutions because I always like to emphasize that sustainable community development of sustainable places needs to be a portfolio of solutions. There is no magic bullet. Oftentimes somebody will say that, well, urban agriculture can do this, but it cannot do those 3 other things. Well, it doesn't necessarily have to do those 3 other things. You can have 3 other programs addressing those. But let's see if urban agriculture or any individual program can deliver positive results for us. Okay? And so that's why the exploration of whether urban agriculture or green infrastructure in general can be a way to repurpose vacant lands in some of these post-industrial cities. Thinking about it from a broader understanding of values, so triple bottom line benefits means that, I'm simplifying a little bit, but we have this conventional or traditional mindset that economic progress alone is the most important indicator of progress, and that if we make economic progress, then that will allow us to address all the other issues. And that is, it's not an entirely false argument, but that's not necessarily the only narrative that we have to think about. And the approach that I take in my work is to take a triple bottom line approach, in the sense that it's not just the economic bottom line, but thinking about social bottom line, environmental bottom lines. What are some of our goals in terms of achieving progress, economic progress, social progress, environmental progress. So that's sort of the concept behind the triple bottom line approach. So as part of this research, this is the overview, is to conduct triple bottom line analysis for urban agricultures. We did the urban agriculture research almost like a case study. We wanted to approach it in a systematic way so that as part of as a result of this research, we learn about the triple bottom line benefits of urban agriculture, but we also get a better understanding of triple bottom line analysis in general so that we can use it for other purposes as well. The approaches we used is, first of all, to see what has been done already, so that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And then use methods that are mostly coming out of the discipline of ecological economics, which is, you can call it a variant, a subfield within economics, that tries to challenge some of the conventional assumptions of neoclassical economics and takes a slightly different approach to things like valuation and cost-benefit analysis and other things. So we use some of those methods and then try to think about how to present the results in a more policy-relevant way. You know that I come from an interdisciplinary background. My undergraduate was in civil and environmental engineering. So I come from an applied field of study, and that reflects in my research in environmental studies as well, which means that whenever I'm thinking about an academic research project, I'm always also thinking about how can we use the results of that research in the real world. What's the applied aspect of that research? How can we make that research more policy relevant? And then hopefully the broader impact that I'm looking for from this work is to develop a better understanding of the value of urban agriculture in Great Lakes cities. That means that, not just for Cleveland, but is urban agriculture a feasible way of dealing with vacant land crisis in Great Lakes cities, asking questions such as, is our urban agriculture durable land use for these cities or not? So is it something that's happening just now because we have this economic crisis? Is it here to stay, or is it a transitional thing? So asking some of those questions, and hopefully that will make us more informed about other types of green infrastructure solutions as well. Right? So that's sort of the background of the research that I'll be presenting. How are we doing so far?
Good.
Do I have you all with me? All right. Okay. So this is the conceptual sort of framework behind what I just talked about traditional or conventional way of approaching economics and an alternative. So in the traditional sense, and how many economists in the room here? Okay, good. So, I mean, this is not high-level economics. These are basic approaches within neoclassical economics, is that the factors of production are land, capital, and labor. That's your production function right there. And then progress is measured in terms of gross domestic product, GDP, and the things that go into GDP, consumption, investment, government, spending, and such. Okay. Now, the critique of this side of the equation is that GDP looks at economic growth in terms of economic activity and everything that goes into the calculation of that economic activity. It doesn't necessarily distinguish between good economic activity versus bad economic activity. And I'll give you an example. So if you have, let's say, the oil spill in the Gulf. If you just look at GDP, you'll see that it will show an increase in GDP because of the oil spill. How is that possible? Does anyone? Government spending on cleanup. So there are more economic activity there because you're cleaning up the mess, right? one can argue that that's not necessarily a sign of progress, because something bad happened and we're trying to address that. GDP also doesn't distinguish between, or doesn't address sort of equality of access to progress as a result of economic growth. So, if you have widening income inequality or growing income inequality, your GDP can still go up, but you may have wealth concentrated within a smaller segment of the society. So I can go on and on about critique of GDP, but just wanted to give you a couple of examples that there are certain limitations of this. Ecological economics approaches it from a more holistic perspective, thinking about not just land, labor, and capital, but thinking about capital more broadly, about human capital, built capital, natural capital, or even social capital. Okay? And I'll give you an example to illustrate that. So if in a community you have greater number of people volunteering their time on community work, okay? GDP will not capture that in any way, and it's not going to be reflected in GDP. But ecological economics, or the alternative to GDP, which is genuine progress indicator, would actually show whether volunteer work is increasing in a particular community or not. And if it does, it will be considered as a positive contribution to progress. Okay? So within ecological economics, the genuine progress indicator gives you a different way of looking at economic progress. Okay? Says that traditional economic growth will include that. Obviously, GDP grows, that's a sign of economic progress, but that's not necessarily a sign of overall progress. To calculate overall progress, you will need to look at some of the other things. If social capital is lost in the process, then we need to deduct the value of that. If there is greater environmental degradation, like the oil spill, if it has ecological costs, those need to be deducted from GDP. On the other hand, if there is growth in natural capital, if you have more afforestation going on, if you have restored wetlands in your area, if you have more people volunteering their time in community, then your genuine progress indicator will go up. So what it really does is it makes adjustments to the GDP. Okay? Now, why am I talking about this in an urban agriculture talk? Because it's important. In valuing urban agriculture, we want to make a case that not just the economic value is important, but the social value is also important. The ecological value is also important. But that kind of mindset needs to be embraced at the upper levels of policymaking or local government or regional government. Otherwise, I can do the calculations, but those are not going to be used in actual decision making. So regionally, as a region, and I just gave a talk on genuine progress indicator last week to an audience of local sustainability groups, because I want to make a point that it's important to embrace sort of alternative visions of progress in order to be able to actually recognize the triple bottom line benefits of individual programs. Okay? So it kind of contextualizes that research, triple bottom line research on urban agriculture in the larger context. I'm happy to share my slides with you so you can take a look at this later, but these are the 26 different indicators that the genuine progress indicator looks at to make corrections to GDP. For example, it looks at income distribution in a community, and if there is greater inequality, it considers that as a negative. Okay? It looks at, I'll just give you one or two other examples here and then move on. If you look at, let's say, cost of commuting, which means that if people are spending more time commuting to work, if you have longer commute, that's deducted. The economic cost of that is deducted from GDP. Okay? Same goes with defensive expenditure. We look at if people are spending more money on security systems and locks, that means it's a sign of lack of safety in the neighborhood. GDP will say, hey, we're selling more security systems, economic progress. But GPI would say, well, no, that's not necessarily a sign of progress. It's showing signs of problems in our society. Okay? And if you look at, and this is a study done by Redefining Progress, looking at US GDP versus GPI, and what we learned from that is that over time, the GDP keeps going up, but if you look at GPI, beyond about late 70s, early 80s, it's remained fairly flat. So essentially, all these additional economic growth didn't necessarily make life better. Now, this stops at 2000. I'm sure if we look at the last 10 years or so, then you even see declining GPI in the US because of the economic crisis. So underneath the triple bottom line analysis is this idea of economic valuation. So when I say that the ecological cost of something like the oil spill is going to be included, that means we need to be able to determine the cost of the oil spill to begin with. And there are techniques, particularly within some within environmental economics, and then definitely within ecological economics, where we're able to consider the full range of social, economic, and ecological benefits. And as I will demonstrate a little bit later, that some of these benefits we can actually calculate dollar values. For others, it's hard to put a dollar value on certain things. There we can only make qualitative assessments. So, for example, in case of green infrastructure, what we try to do is that we try to modify and urban agriculture being a green infrastructure, to monetize benefits for easy aggregation, meaning that, if you have different kinds of benefits, let's say urban agriculture helps make air quality better, suppose, and helps in stormwater management. How do you put those two benefits together? So if you have economic value assigned to it, then it makes it easier to compare multiple benefits and also add the benefits up. So that's another rationale for monetizing, assigning dollar values to benefits. So here's a quote about agriculture as I make a transition to more focused discussion on urban agriculture. And I'm going to read it because I think it's a very good one. There is a quiet revolution stirring in our food system. It is not happening so much on the distant farms that still provide us with the majority of our food. It is happening in cities, neighborhoods, and towns. It has evolved out of the basic need of every person has to know their food and to have some sense of control over its safety and security. It is a revolution that is providing poor people with an important safety net where they can grow some nourishment and income for themselves and their families. And it is providing an oasis for the human spirit where urban people can gather, preserve something of their culture through native seeds and foods, and teach their children about food and the earth. The revolution is taking place in small gardens, under railroad tracks and power lines, on rooftops, at farmers' markets, and in the most unlikely of places. It is a movement that has the potential to address a multitude of issues: economic, environmental, personal health, and cultural. So in our research on urban agriculture, we try to capture those range of values of urban agriculture, within this broader framework of sustainable agriculture. And then the way we try to do our calculations, so this is kind of the blank spreadsheet that gives you an outline of the framework, is that we would want to calculate the economic benefits, the ecological benefits, the social benefits. If we can calculate dollar values, then we will calculate the dollar per acre from each of these benefits and then add them up. There will be indirect economic estimates. In some cases, it won't be dollar per acre, but give us some way of measuring economic benefit. And then there will be a range of benefits that are qualitative estimates, meaning that we know either from past research or from our field work that those benefits exist. We have some idea about how strong contribution urban agriculture would make to those, but we don't have any way of measuring the economic value of that benefit. Right? Make sense? Do I still have you guys with me? Awesome. All right, so when we were looking at urban agriculture, we had to define what we mean by agriculture. So we were looking at specifically community gardens and market gardens. The main difference being the community gardens are those who are not for profit, and the market gardens are those who are for profit. We realized that in the Cleveland area, there are different kinds of community gardens and market gardens. Some of them are affiliated with organizations, like local churches are often involved with supporting community gardens. Schools are involved in the process. And then obviously because of CASE and CSU and OSU, there are university-affiliated programs. The grant was through Cleveland Botanical Garden, who run the Green Core program, and they have gardens, I think about 6 or 8 gardens in the Cleveland area. So there are different kinds of community garden and market gardens here. So for those, we wanted to calculate total benefits as a sum of economic, ecological, and social benefits. What I'm going to show you is sort of our starting outline of what are some of those benefits, what are some of those economic benefits, what are some of the social benefits we were considering, and what are some of the ecological benefits that we were considering. And we prepared that list based on literature reviews. So what we first did was we went out and we looked at past research on urban agriculture from the US and also from other countries to come up with like a big list of what are the different kinds of economic benefits, what are the different kinds of social benefits that people have identified in the US or elsewhere. And we came up with a range of economic benefits. Maintenance saving. If you are not doing urban agriculture, then somebody will have to take care of those places. There are some estimates that the city of Cleveland spends several $1 million every year just to maintain vacant properties or vacant lands. Philadelphia spends upwards of $15 to $20 million on maintaining vacant lands. If you convert that land to urban agriculture so that the city doesn't have to maintain it anymore, the savings of maintenance cost can be considered as a value of urban agriculture if you convert a vacant land. Make sense? So that's kind of a reverse way of thinking about value. It's like cost avoided is considered as a value. Of course, if you create employment, so that's an example of indirect economic value. You can, if you say that we will create 2 jobs per acre in urban agriculture operation, that means it's hard to say what the net economic value of those 2 jobs are, but creating jobs is a sign of economic progress, right? So it's an indirect economic estimate. Obviously, net benefit of production, so whatever you produce there, you can sell them, or even if you don't sell them, that means people, in case of non-profit community gardens, if somebody is getting their source of vegetable from a community garden, there is no transaction in the market, right? They're not paying anybody. But if they didn't get it from that garden, they would be spending money somewhere to get those vegetables, right? So we consider those values as well. Impact on neighborhood. So you have a vacant land that is not properly kept up, converted to urban agriculture, you have a productive use of that land, and that would help the image of that particular community. That adds value to the property values of homes in that community, right? So that's the neighborhood property values, like urban agriculture you have. And there are studies that have shown, done elsewhere, and we did it for Cleveland as well, that there is positive impact on home values if you have a garden within a certain distance. And then also the value of volunteer work that I mentioned earlier. If people are volunteering their time working on a garden, that time has value. Okay? All right. There are a range of ecological values. I'm not going to go through all of them, but just to say that urban agriculture can actually provide a range of economic value. Air pollution removal, stormwater management, decreased carbon footprint of food. That's the one that I find quite interesting, which is if you don't get food from your community garden, the average food in the US travels over 1,000 miles from farm to your plate, right? So if you can shorten that distance, then you save on fuel that would be used to transport that food and whatever carbon emissions are associated with that fuel. Are you with me on that one? Okay. All right, good. So, and there are a number of other ecological values associated with urban agriculture. And there are a range of social values, and given that I'm speaking to this audience, I'm sure there is interest in the health benefits and cognitive benefits of urban agriculture. And everything that's listed here has a published paper or a study or a report behind it demonstrating that impact exists. Okay? So improved diet. People who are engaged in community gardening have demonstrated that the mix of food that they consume changes before and after involvement. They're eating more healthy food as a result of being involved in community gardens. Overall physical well-being of persons in contact with nature. And there are some of these studies that are not just urban agriculture, but just having access to green space in a particular area. It has a range of health benefits and cognitive benefits. There are community level benefits like community interaction. It provides a space where children in the community can go spend time, elderly who go out for walks or have been demonstrated to make a stop at the community garden site and then spend some time there and so on. So there are a range of values. Our final set will be slightly different from this, but I wanted to show you where we started from. So how are we doing on time? We should have another 5-10 minutes.
You can go till about 1. I think people will stick around for about till 10 after.
Is that okay? All right. So the hedonic model. I mean, I'll go through this quickly, but I just wanted to demonstrate like 1 or 2 examples of how we calculate things. And these are a little bit more mathematical than other things. But I just wanted to show you. So we wanted to look at the effect of urban gardens on neighborhood property values. Okay? And we had 3 models. You don't have to read the equations here, but basically in model 1, we were looking at proximity to gardens. the proximity of a home. How close are you to the nearest garden? The second one, we were looking at whether there is a garden within a certain distance from the house. And in the third one, we were looking at number of gardens within a certain distance from the house. And we analyzed whether these have effects or not. So we prepared a list of gardens in the Cleveland area. I think our list was, at least at the time, better than any other lists that were out there, because we got lists from OSU, we got lists from other organizations. We put them together, we made calls to places to figure out who's in operation, who's not. So we tried to get to a good list. And then we also got lists of homes sold in the Cleveland area from 2008 to 2012. So we knew what homes were sold, at what price they were sold. Okay? We looked at some of the variables from census, like what's the income level in that particular neighborhood and so on. And then we did a GIS analysis. So in GIS, we basically digitized all the gardens in the Cleveland area, and we imported information of all the houses sold. Okay, so that gave us a geographic information database. That allowed us to do some calculations. So just in terms of numbers, our final sample was about 10,000 homes. Let's see, a little less than 10,000 homes sold in the Cleveland area over those 4 years. It was a pretty comprehensive database that we used to do the analysis. This is kind of a visual. It shows sort of homes sold, and then these lines shows the outlines of the buffers we created. So we did, for a particular home, we would say, if this is a home and this is a community garden, we would calculate this distance. So we did this analysis within within GIS. And let me skip over the significant results and go to the final result, which is basically we found out that presence of a garden within 400 meters of homes significantly affects home prices. Okay, so that's, we couldn't tell how much, but we knew that there is a significant effect that exists. And 400 meters is a very interesting number, because in urban planning, we often now talk about whether it's smart growth or new urbanism. You talk about a quarter-mile radius being the feasible radius for a walkable neighborhood. Okay, so we also chose that 400 meters, which is a quarter miles, as sort of the distance that is within kind of a walkable range. Someone could access that space. And then we found out that if you have a garden within 400 meters, based on homes sold between 2008 and 2012, there was about a 3% effect on price. So you would get 3% higher if you had a garden within 400 meters. Yeah.
What were the years again of the
2008 to 2012. Okay. And I'm not saying that this number is perfect, but I'm saying that there is a positive impact that exists. And we filtered out all the other characteristics of the homes. So, we made sure that we controlled for, size of home, age of home, quality of home, number of bedrooms, and all the other features that you would consider, and also considered the economic health of that particular block. So looked at median income and controlled for all of those variables. And then, we were left with urban gardens. So this is an example of one analysis. Here is another analysis that we did, which is we looked at how many kgs of different pollutants would be removed by an urban garden. Okay? And then we calculated the value of removal of those pollutants. Once again, these are done using methods in the field of ecological economics, and it often considers health-related issues. How many fewer doctors' visits, how many shorter hospital stays, and other things, and then assigns economic values to those types of savings. So these are a couple of examples. And then in terms of social benefits, for example, we surveyed about 55 gardens in the Cleveland area. And by looking at results of those surveys, we found out that significant percent of people reported that there were positive impacts in their overall life, health, increased vegetables in diet, reported greater community interaction in their neighborhoods. Okay? So these are some of the qualitative observation. We're saying that there is greater community interaction as a result of urban agriculture. We surveyed people, and the vast majority say, yes, there is greater community interaction. Then there were kind of sub-questions within that composite variable. We asked people that, do you see more elderly there? What do people do? Do they talk to each other? So, and then we put together all of those different observations. Another statistical analysis we did was we asked people about perception of safety before and after the garden was there. Crime level before and after garden was there. Stress level before and after people were involved in gardening. Okay? And then in all of those, we had significant results in pairwise t-tests. Once again, I don't report, I'll come to that in just a second. I don't report the statistical results, but just report that there is a change observed. And these are what people perceive. So we're looking at survey data. These are not necessarily other objective analysis. You had a question.
Were they asked those at the same time, or you actually had the pre-gardening post?
No, we asked them at the same time. So it's like, first we asked that, before the garden was established, what are your ratings on these? And then we asked them, what's after? So it's not perfect, but at the time it was the best we could get.
And these questions are not scaled; they're actually binary. So your mean is actually the difference between 1 and 0.
No, I think they were at on scale. So they rated on a scale.
Like 1 to 5.
Right, 1 to 5.
My apologies, I have to leave. But my question is, did you guys have any conversations with the educational institutions? And at least the next question is, would it be beneficial, or how beneficial would it be to develop a program in a school around urban agriculture? I said for students that leave school with these type of skills, in the next 5 to 10 years, would they migrate right into the, to the communities and to continue to grow, or take urban agriculture to the upscale?
That's a good question. I mean, as part of this research, we spoke to anyone involved in urban agriculture research in the area. So particularly, we collaborated with OSU. We had a lot of conversation with their OSU Agriculture Extension. And at Oberlin, in environmental studies, students have a pathway in urban agriculture that they can pursue. So we have that there. But no, I think it's a good, important conversation to have. What kind of expertise do we need? I think people graduating from a variety of fields like environmental science or soil science.
And actually, I'm sorry, I'm speaking at a high school level.
Okay, we didn't directly have conversations in the Cleveland area. But once again, in Oberlin, and Oberlin is not necessarily always the best example. It's kind of a small liberal arts college town. But there, we have a lot of collaboration between college and schools. We have our elementary school environmental studies students several years ago installed learning gardens there where kids can learn to garden, experience garden from like 3rd grade. So, and they also have herb gardens in high school, and so those things are happening at a smaller scale, but yeah, I mean, I think those are great ideas. So summing up the results here, the economic benefits, the ones we could calculate, we found out that the maintenance cost saving per acre would be over $1,000. Profits from food production, whether you're selling it or you're consuming it, is about over $30,000 a year per acre. So that gives us a total economic value of about $35,000 per acre. Now, what we're trying to do is giving people, the decision makers, some tools to compare that. Do we encourage residential development here, commercial development, or is urban agriculture a feasible alternative? Now, these numbers are not necessarily super high, but let's look at some of the other things. We found out that that you can get about 4 full-time equivalent jobs per acre in an urban agriculture site. Okay, but full-time is, in this particular case, defined much narrowly. And then obviously the results from the hedonic analysis that about greater than 3% effect on neighborhood property values. In terms of ecological benefits, so this is where, remember I showed you this matrix earlier on that there will be direct benefits that we'll be able to calculate and add up. There will be benefits that are kind of indirect. There are benefits that are qualitative. We know that they exist, but we don't know the magnitude of that benefit. So in terms of direct benefits, we could calculate about additional $6,500 worth of benefits through air pollution removal, stormwater retention, decreased carbon footprint, things like that. And then when we went to social benefits, there are nothing in the dollar column because we didn't feel that we had enough information or whether it was even appropriate to put dollar values on support for education programs or improved diet. I mean, those are benefits that we all value, but we don't really necessarily know the dollar value of those. And we found if it's green, it means that more than 75% of the respondents strongly agree to those benefits. So if it's yellow, then more than 50% of the respondents either agree or strongly agree. And then if it's gray, that means that we found evidence from other studies that those benefits exist, but our Cleveland survey didn't really reveal any additional evidence in support of those. When we put that together, we see that the total benefit went up from $34,000 to $42,000 in terms of direct economic benefits that we can calculate per acre, per year from an urban agriculture in Cleveland. And then the additional benefits, the ones that we cannot directly measure, it's at least we are able to present that to decision makers saying that, hey, those exist, revisit your priorities, go from gross domestic product to a genuine progress indicator type mind frame, and then you'll see the value of those. You had a question?
Just in terms of the profits, for per acre, the $34,000, does that assume that the food production goes completely into commercial sale, or is that the intrinsic value of the food?
No, it's so the assumption is that if you sold the food and got revenues from it, then that will be the value. Now, if it's a non-profit, garden that's not selling foods, we would say that that value exists. It's just that there is no transaction in the market. So, but yes, calculation of that is based on the assumption that if you were to sell all the food, and then you deduct the cost of land and the taxes and salaries and wages and all the expenses, the net profit from your operation could be $34,000.
So then you really have two pie charts, one where the